Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call our meeting to order. Today's meeting is a special joint meeting of the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee and the Utilities Advisory Commission. So thank you, staff, for suggesting that we do this today. I think it'll be really helpful for us to hear from each other. So before we get started, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Metz?
Here.
Commissioner Tucker?
Here.
Councilmember Burt?
Here.
Commissioner Gupta?
Here.
Vice Chair Phillips?
Here.
Chair Vinker?
Here.
Councilmember Liu?
Here.
Commissioner Croft?
Here.
Chair Mauder?
Present.
Commissioner Scharf? For the record, all members of the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee and Utilities Advisory Commission are present.
That is impressive. Well done, people. All right. Well, so item 1 on today's agenda is going to be our joint item with participation from both the committee and the commission. After item 1, we will take a 5-minute break and the Utilities Advisory Commission will be released, and after which the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee will reconvene to hear item 2. So with that, Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on items not on the agenda?
We have no request to speak for general public comment.
All right, thank you. So it is our tradition at the Climate Action Committee to do standing verbal reports, so I will turn first to staff.
Thank you, Chair Vinker. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works, and I do have a few updates to share. So first, in the first quarter of this year, 2026, the city was accepted into the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator City Climate Innovation Challenge to support development of a curbside EV charging pilot program. So that is in the works, and staff intends to bring a preliminary plan for program design to the Climate Action Sustainability Committee for feedback in the second half of 2026. So we'll be getting that onto an agenda. Next, I'm sure most of you are aware that the city celebrated the grand opening of its new Bryant Street Community Center last week, which houses both a teen center and a permanent dining room location for La Comida. But what you might not have heard is that this building was part of the non-residential packaged HVAC pilot program, which replaced aging gas HVAC equipment with all electric equipment. So this was one of 13 projects, most of which are either completed or in the construction phase, that staff estimates in sum represent about 25% of probably the annual turnover for that type of units. So staff is actually ending that program and transitioning over to what we're calling the Advanced HVAC Pilot Program. But all of these projects that included the Bryant Street Community Center provided a lot of important data that's factoring into the design of that next program. And lastly, I wanted to announce that we have some new members of our Climate Action Working Group that serves as advisors to staff on the climate action and sustainability initiatives. We've added several over the past couple of months. So they are David Cole from Carbon Free Palo Alto, Hillary Glenn and Andrea Gara from 350 Silicon Valley Palo Alto team, and Aiden Miao, who's the current chair of the Youth Climate Advisory Board. So those are my updates, and Utilities Director.
Yeah, it's a couple updates for this group in general. Wanted to provide some really good news on CARB extending Cap and Invest and knowing that program. So for 2027 to 2030, we'll actually be receiving a significant increase in the amount of allocations and revenues. It's going to be going up by 193%, which will be several $1 million that we can use for affordability, looking for climate action programs as well. And rebates for our customers. So we're really excited about that, and that's part of the discussion today. In addition, we have an induction cooktop rebate program. We're going to actually have a few booths over at the chili cook-off as well. So you'll see staff there trying to show our residents induction cooktops. And that completes my report.
All right, thank you very much. I seem to be having some kind of allergic something, so if from time to time I step away, please forgive me. But, so now we turn to committee member comments and announcements, and I invite commissioners as well if there's something relevant that the body should know about, either from another organization you've been involved with or some other thing relevant to this meeting. I welcome you to ring in now. There's a light on down there, and it says Bert, but I think it's coming. It's either inadvertently pushed or it is one of you. Okay, does any commissioner to my left or council member want to speak? Anybody to my right? Okay, I'm going to undo this light. And I will just say, I saw the director of Lacey last week, and so had I known about the EV opportunity, I might have lobbied a little. But that's great news. Director Eggleston, thank you. I just have one item that I would like to report, and that is that after a lengthy, competitive, nationwide search, the Commission of the Northern California Power Agency has appointed a new general manager. And that general manager is Tony Zimmer. Tony has been with NCPA for more than 25 years. He, up until yesterday, or I guess until Monday, serves as the Assistant General Manager of Power Management at NCPA. So we had quite an extensive recruitment process and interview process, and I wanted you all to know about that change. Randy Howard's last day, I believe, is today. The outgoing general manager. And I exchanged emails with Tony yesterday and have invited him to come to Palo Alto, which he says he will do. So for those of you who would like to meet with him, we will let you know when that will come to pass. Okay, anybody else? All right, seeing no lights, we can move on to our first joint action item.
Sure. Okay. So good afternoon, commissioners and council members. Kylie Nazay, Assistant City Manager. I just wanted to kick off today's item and ultimately this joint session at a high level. Today is really a part of staff and the council's continuous strategic planning effort about how the city will reach its climate goals and the resources that are necessary to achieve them. While we've made a lot of progress to reducing our emissions, it will need more time to achieve its 80% goal. Whatever strategy and timeline that ultimately the council and the community chooses to reach this goal, it's really going to be important to balance climate progress and affordability as we navigate this. And so we wanted to invite the two bodies, the UAC and the committee, to discuss this together to help give staff joint feedback on the scope of this upcoming modeling effort. This really is our attempt to ensure both bodies have the information they need later this year to advise the council on both utility impacts as well as emission benefits of these strategies. So with that, we'll kick off the joint session and turn it over to staff for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Nosey. My name is Jonathan Abendschein. I'm the Assistant Director for Climate Action, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the strategic planning we're going to do this year. So this year we want to help the City Council decide if they want to set a different timeline for achieving the 80% emissions reduction goal and what role they want the city to play in achieving that. So today we're going to talk about 6 proposed strategies for community-wide electrification that achieve the 80% goal on different timelines and whose costs we plan to evaluate using the SCAP funding model. Now, we're not asking for a recommendation today on which one of these policies to follow. We only want feedback on the range of policies so we can be confident when we return with the results later this year that you have the information you need to make policy recommendations. And we're planning to return in December or early 2027 with the results. We're planning to discuss the utility impacts of each strategy with the UAC at that time, and then have the Sustainability Committee provide recommendations to the City Council on which strategy to pursue. And that'll enable us to make sure that the next climate action work plan, which starts in 2028, aligns with that long-term vision. Next slide, please. All right, so modeling climate action at community scale with all the different interrelated costs and impacts is really hard, and there aren't a lot of community scale models out there to draw from, but our 2 prior modeling efforts have given us a much stronger understanding of community-wide electrification, and we're well positioned to lay out some actionable options this year. So our first effort back in 2020 was a partnership between staff and the consultant AECOM. In that study, we were only able to identify 72% reductions. And while we were still able to make some preliminary cost estimates with that information, staff didn't have the knowledge and time to dig as deeply as we'd like, and the consultant didn't have the capacity and the budget to do such a comprehensive analysis. But we identified some good early areas to focus on. And we identified our knowledge gaps as far as programs go, and then we identified the knowledge gaps we needed to focus on in the next study. Then, starting in 2024, we contracted with E3 and Willdan to fill in those knowledge gaps through studies of EV charging needs and electrification opportunities in the multifamily and non-residential sector. And we also had them build out a community-wide funding model for us. Now, as part of that effort, we had them model a few illustrative scenarios with a focus on the 80 by 30 goal, which we presented to the Sustainability Committee late last year and to the Council earlier this year. Now, we learned a lot about the financial dynamics of community-wide electrification from these scenarios, but they were not intended to provide a consultant-driven definitive answer for what the city should do. We wanted that policy conversation to be staff-driven, and that's the conversation that we're having this year. So, as we noted earlier, we've achieved quite a bit on our greenhouse gas goals thanks to those early studies and pilots, with the biggest contributor still the reduction in our electric portfolio emissions, followed by high rates of EV adoption in Palo Alto and remote work as well, which drives down VMT. We still have a long way to go on building electrification, but we've got, and that's the toughest area and the one where we do have the most influence locally. But we've gotten a great start with about 6% of Palo Altans having electrified an appliance already, and programs getting off the ground recently in the commercial and soon the multifamily sector as well. So our goal with this exercise is to build on that past progress and figure out how to make it an ongoing practice. Next slide, please. So generally what we found in our prior studies and pilot programs is that while good voluntary program designs can accelerate adoption, and adoption rates are up 5 to 10 times from where they were when we just had plain old rebate programs, they can only do so much, and regulations are also needed. And then when dealing with community scale programs, upfront rebates require a great deal of upfront funding, and they have other issues as well, that it would exceed current city resources if we wanted to scale those programs up citywide. But we also found that based on 2024 assumptions, electrification is a net community benefit, meaning that the long-term benefits offset the increased upfront investment. And this makes sense when you think about the long-term savings from maintaining just one energy system in your homes and your community rather than 3 systems. But there are transitional issues in trying to transition from 3 systems to 1 system. The benefits are distributed unevenly. Some people see a net benefit, others don't. And these are based on 2024 assumptions, so some of these insights might shift as we update our assumptions to reflect the current policy environment. But we don't want to focus on the net community benefit in the 2026 modeling. The most important thing we want to focus on is the cost impact to individual community members and the city, along with its utilities, since that'll best inform what strategies are going to work best for us. Next slide, please. So we will be updating those 2024 assumptions. I'm not going to go through every item on this list, but I just wanted to note a few. I'm happy to answer questions on any of them, but first off, external funding is less available. That was actually a relatively small part of the revenues and the funding sources in the illustrative scenarios, but we do nevertheless want to update that. I also just want to note grid modernization costs have gone up, but we're developing more flexible strategies to reduce costs by ensuring we only build capacity when it's needed. So we'd update that underlying assumption. And then the future of California's signature EV legislation is uncertain, Advanced Clean Cars 2. And that'll have a big effect on our EV forecast, which puts more importance on building electrification as a strategy. Next slide, please. All right, so when I talk about these strategic alternatives or strategic options, this is what I'm talking about. Essentially, it's a package of policies. So that includes the programs assumed in the strategy as well as the local regulations. And for each strategy, we plan to estimate the adoption rates that this package of policies results in, and then input that into the model to output the costs. And we can also model the effects of carbon pricing, subsidies to maintain affordability for those still using gas as community electrification proceeds, and assumptions about electric rate design. Next slide, please. These are the 6 alternatives we're proposing to model. So there's a baseline that assumes no local action that allows us to understand the impact of the other 5 strategies by looking at the differences between those and the baseline. Strategies 2 and 3 will illustrate the cost and impact of adoption of income-qualified programs and regulations by isolating each of those in its own alternative. Strategy 4 is a combination of strategies 2 and 3, so with some additional programs to cover non-income qualified community members who are exempt from regulations. So folks who might not be income qualified but might have complex projects that might exempt them from regulations, but for whom we still want to try and drive adoption. Strategy 5 maximizes end-of-life electrification through comprehensive programs and regulations, potentially including for people who are regulated. But it doesn't, and the goal here is to see what package of policies would push maximum end-of-life electrification. But it doesn't push people to retire equipment early. This one would definitely require additional revenue sources. And then strategy 6 adds early retirement as a way to achieve the 80% goal on a timeline as close as possible to the current 2030 goal. It's the most ambitious option on the menu and the closest to what would be needed to reach the 80 by 30. Next slide, please. So with these scenarios and the updated assumptions, we plan to, so first we're going to estimate the adoption rates for these 6 strategies, and that'll allow us to estimate the year in which the 80% reductions are achieved for each strategy, and then we'll input them into the model along with the updated assumptions, and then that'll output the community revenue need for each strategy. We'll then identify a set of revenue sources and calculate the rate impacts and the impact on community member expenses. And we're likely going to need to work through a few different combinations of revenue sources. And we have some additional internal discussion and legal work to do to work out what combination of revenue sources could be viable. We'll also need to factor in how carbon pricing or policies around the gas transition and electric rates could affect the outcomes. Next slide, please. So this slide lists the revenue options that we'd use in the model. And obviously, each source has different constraints. Some affect the utility bill, some don't. So taxes not related to the utility bill wouldn't affect bills or energy affordability, but funding sources related to utility usage would. And as they impact the utility bill, that could raise affordability concerns, even if, as is the case in a lot of electrification projects, those bill increases could be offset by savings in other household expenses. EVs or EV adoption is a good example of that, or could result in a lower cost energy system over the longer term. You still, when you see that bill increasing, that's what you're paying attention to. I also just wanted to note the role of restricted revenues like public benefits, cap and invest, and LCFS, which have been our primary funding source for climate programs so far. They tend to be most useful for pilots and transitional programs in the years leading up to regulations taking effect. On their own, these funding sources are insufficient for the most ambitious strategies we're modeling, though they might be enough for some of the less program-intensive strategies. And of course, as we noted to the Council at its May 2025 meeting on this topic, using these revenues for climate action programs does mean they can't be used for other compliant purposes that would reduce rates. Next slide, please. I just want to, when we have had some folks asking about pricing carbon, the the price of carbon that's needed to really drive a full electrification transition is a lot higher than what's in the market right now. You have a gradual scaling up over time. And so the question comes up, is it possible to price carbon? And I just wanted to highlight that there are a couple of competing things that affect the gas bill. When we did the gas, I want to remind everyone about the gas transition study that we brought some preliminary results about last fall, which found that very high levels of electrification are required before many mains can be removed. And the preliminary, so essentially, we looked at, you have about 40% of the costs for the gas utility that are fixed. Obviously, that varies with market prices. And so there is a certain amount of bill increase that happens as sales decline due to community-wide electrification. And so that creates a policy choice about whether you need to find another funding source for subsidies that could help provide some relief to folks who are still using gas. And there's an interaction between that phenomenon and, potential policies that would, potential carbon pricing policies. So we talked a little bit about carbon pricing alternatives at the April Sustainability Committee meeting. Realistically, in the beginning years, carbon pricing could be a tool to affect cost effectiveness. In later years, as you have declining sales, you have a policy lever around those additional subsidies or lack of subsidies and how they affect the gas bill if what you're concerned about is electrification cost effectiveness. So essentially what we're going to do with the modeling is we're going to take a look at a baseline scenario with no carbon pricing and look at a couple of different subsidy options, and then if it makes sense to incorporate carbon pricing into the model for one of these options to provide policy information, we'll do that. Next slide, please. So we talked to the working group about this study yesterday. There were questions about the 6 options, but the overall feedback seemed to be that they made sense. There was a lot of discussion about the carbon pricing and gas decommissioning dimensions of community-wide electrification. There was a comment noting that air district regulations, could be delayed or didn't move forward. Could be delayed or might not move forward, and that would affect the strategic options, and we have to be prepared to be able to model that if something like that occurs. And then a comment about emphasizing, as I think will be emphasized today, the need to take care to focus on affordability, including looking at sources of funding that don't necessarily impact utility bills, which is definitely on the menu. And then as a potential sub-option, trying to focus on a single area of electrification to make progress. And then there was also just a comment to ensure we don't delay work on other efforts like local regulations or financing while completing the analysis, and that is definitely staff's intention to keep the 2026, 2027 work plan moving forward. Next slide, please. So this is what we're seeking feedback from the committee and the UAC on. Do these strategic alternatives, are these the 6 alternatives that are going to give you the range of policy options you need to be able to advise the council on utility impacts and to be able to recommend to them a strategy for community-wide electrification going forward?
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think what would be the most helpful way for us to proceed with 10 of us is to now turn to any clarifying questions about what you've heard so far, and then we'll go to public comment, and then we can come back and share our insights, thoughts, and views on these 6 options. So let me first open it up. It's going to be a little, I don't know if I can use these lights because they're not really helpful. So I will just look for, turn your microphone on, and I'll look for red lights for anyone who wants to speak. So I think that's Commissioner Gupta. I happen to be looking to my left, and then I'll come back over here. Bob.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. Just a clarifying question on option 5. When you say maximize end of life, are you talking about gas appliance end of life, or are you talking about the gas system end of life, or something else?
No, gas appliance end of life. So And I did have, there was pointed out during the working group meeting that some of the regulations might drive a little bit of early retirement, but that's, the overall intent is end of life, end of gas appliance life.
You mentioned, just a very simple clarifying question, that looking to replace 3 systems with 1 system. What are the 3 systems?
Sorry, I meant to say 3 systems: electricity, gas, and gasoline.
Okay.
Yeah, I did not ask about this yesterday. I'm curious, just looking at the greenhouse gas inventory, where transportation fits in, just 57% still coming from on-road transportation. Does that fit into this, or are we just looking at buildings? And is there a separate discussion on transportation?
We're looking at both transportation and buildings, but we do have a lot more influence on buildings. Where we have more influence with transportation tends to be both on active transportation, and then making sure that there's access to adequate EV charging, especially for folks who are underserved.
So charging is in kind of within each of these options that you're looking at?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, again, thank you for the presentation. I had 2 clarification questions. First of all, regarding regulations, what would be an example of regulation that we might have, given that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, will have their regulations going forward? Presumably we wouldn't write something that would conflict with what they're doing. But so I'm trying to understand what would be an example of regulation we would have that would be on top of that.
Yeah, they're meant to be complementary. So the 2 most promising looking regulations so far are Building Emissions Savings Ordinance and Building Performance Standards. And essentially what these do is they drive electrification in residential as homes are sold, and this is something that Berkeley's adopted. And then with building performance standards through a tightening standard on energy use or emissions.
Okay, so basically.
Generally for larger commercial buildings.
Okay, so conservation measures that be separate from the appliance issues that they would address.
That's right.
Okay. And then the other question was, what does carbon pricing mean in this case? Since if we have, emission-free electricity and we offset carbon CO2 in our gas with offsets, what's left over? And what's the price on?
Well, carbon offsets, the carbon offset gas program is actually a form of carbon pricing. So one approach is to buy products that actually reduce emissions, like offsets. So we do have a carbon pricing program right now.
Right. That's what I'm trying to understand.
There are other products. Yeah, there are other products that one could buy. They have different pricing, but another approach, and the simplest to model, is simply a carbon tax.
That's what I'm trying to understand. On what?
On natural gas use.
Okay. So in addition to the offsets of natural gas, we might have a carbon tax on it.
It's something that we can model. I'm not necessarily saying that we want to recommend that. I just want to be able to.
Definitely not asking for a recommendation, just trying to understand what it means.
But that's the simplest approach for carbon pricing to model.
Okay, great, thank you.
Following up on that question about revenue sources, there was a parcel tax mentioned, and so how would that function to address this? It would just be a bulk revenue source, not related to carbon usage?
That's right. And I think one of the things that may be helpful to do is to do a scan of what sorts of approaches to funding climate programs are out there. A parcel tax is a good stand-in for a non-energy related tax, but there are a lot of other mechanisms that cities are using, and so I think having a scan of that when we bring back the results would be helpful.
Well, and then a legal question, whether it be a carbon tax or a parcel tax, would either of those be specific taxes and require a 2/3 majority? Chris?
Chris, I think everyone's
Yeah.
looking at you.
I was going to say,
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
If we explored either a carbon tax or a parcel tax, would those be specific taxes and require a 2/3 majority?
If they were dedicated to this particular use, they would require 2/3 majority.
That's what I was assuming, okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's useful to look at surveying what are all the different revenue sources, but I also don't want to have lingering out there something that we are thinking may be one or two different options that if we do polling, we may find out that they're off the table, especially with that threshold of 2/3 majority. So rather than commissioning a separate poll, have we looked at incorporating a question or two in our annual resident survey? I forget the title of our survey.
So we haven't gotten that far. I think where we are right now is trying to determine whether there's even an appetite whether there's even a need for or an appetite for raising additional revenue in the first place. And so,
well, let's start with the need part. We've already discussed quite a bit that if we were to really scale our programs, we're far from having the funding to do so. So that, I thought, had, in one sense, established the need. But if the funding to do so is not available, then we would be pivoting to other approaches. So that's why, you know, a little bit of a chicken and egg issue, but I would encourage us to look at getting a sense, even if it's not a full poll on this, can we incorporate that in our annual survey and see whether it's something that has some possibility, or we just say, no, those are off the table. We need to start focusing in other areas.
Yeah, I'll just add that the timing is good for that suggestion because that rolls out in the late summer, and this is the time that we're starting to think about any changes to questions or new questions we might want to incorporate.
Great.
and Councilmember, I think how you described it as a sense is a really nice way, an elegant way to say it, because that our annual resident survey isn't going to be the same statistical sampling and valid as the council is used to when we do, specific ballot measure polling, looking at voter profiles and the like.
Yeah, although even from that survey, we get error bands that are reasonably valuable, especially across the whole community, more so than we look at, it breaks it down by segments of the community, but this would be a community-wide question.
Correct.
What percentage of our citizens have EVs? Do we know?
I should have that on the tip of my tongue, but it's right around 20%.
And isn't that some of the highest in the nation?
It is.
So if we were to, go full out on electrification, but didn't move the needle on EVs, would we get there to 2030? 80%?
So we're in the middle of updating our EV forecasts. With the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation in place, I think the outlook was that EVs were a major driver.
But what I'm really saying is, let's assume it doesn't move. Like maybe it moves to 22%. Let's assume it doesn't move. If we went all out on the rest of the electrification, do we get there or do we not get there? Or do we not know yet?
Yeah, so I think it's unlikely that electric vehicles won't move. If they didn't move, then it would be well near impossible to do it just with building electrification, because that's about 1/3 of the remaining emissions. So we do need EV adoption, and we do need to make sure there's adequate charging. And that will be harder to do without the state regulations, but there are a lot of different factors at play.
Why do you think they're going to move? What's the drivers in people's behavior, given that we're the highest, I think, in California and highest in the country?
We've seen continued adoption year on year on year, and increasing purchases of new vehicles. I think we're going to have to see what happens over the next few years with changes in incentives and changes in state regulations, changes in tariffs, but there's a lot of investment in this space, and people are working to bring costs down, and gas prices are high, gasoline prices are high. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but there are also a lot of factors that point towards continued EV adoption, especially in a place like Palo Alto.
Have there been particular things that you've seen people do that have moved the needle where they adopt more EVs? Or is it just a general, we want to own EVs, gas prices are higher, it's the right thing to do, and people, is it internally driven, or do we have levers, is what I'm really asking.
We have fewer levers for actual EV adoption, but one of the biggest obstacles to EV adoption is availability of charging, and so that's a lever that we do have. There are also, I think, paying attention to electric rates is also important. Palo Alto's lower electric rates, I think, provide a motivation for adoption. And there are ways to do purchase incentives, especially, the income qualified is where you see a lot more focus on the purchase incentives. But I'll just acknowledge that we have fewer levers for that than we do for building electrification.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. So I couldn't hear clearly the question, but I think it was what portion of our car ownership is EV, essentially? Is that what you were saying, 20%?
That's right.
But as staff has been updating us repeatedly, we're now, I think it is 50 or just over 50% of all purchases are EVs, correct?
We're verifying that number right now, even before you asked the question, council member, because wanted to make that point that being at 20%, if you've got 45 or 50% of new purchases EVs, is continuing to drive up.
That's right, and that's been going up steadily. And I've made the point that families that have two vehicles, my anecdotal experience is that they predominantly drive the EV. And so the EV use in the community today is in all likelihood above that 20%. And either way, we're on that track. And as the point you made that that the market forces are driving down the costs of EVs and giving greater selection, but then we still have the state mandate in place of no ICE vehicle sales in 2035, is that correct?
We do, but it's subject to it's been subject
Understood.
to legal challenges, so the impact of it is uncertain.
That's right, but it is, as of right now, that is state law, correct?
I will say that's my understanding. However, I think someone with a little better knowledge of the legal landscape, I need to rely on them, and I don't know if we have that information for you tonight.
Oh, looks like our city attorney might.
Yeah, I mean, you're correct that it remains state law on the books. The enforceability of that law is going to, is in question and might take some time to resolve those questions.
Understood. That's okay. Thank you.
Can I provide the figure we were discussing? So the most recent data we have on percentage of new vehicles purchased in Palo Alto that are EVs is 55%.
Did you say what percent?
55.
55. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that is particularly meaningful because one of the things we do at the Air District is give out grants to communities around the Bay to build EV infrastructure. And from time to time, when we get the use statistics back, because we look at, dollars per ton of carbon removed, they're not good. But that's because they don't have the wherewithal to buy the vehicles in some of the lower income communities. So if ours is at 55, that makes, then you're right to be really focusing on the infrastructure. So that is very good news on that front. I wanted to ask on the underlying assumptions to be updated. The very first one is external funding source availability, federal, state, et cetera. And if this is supposed to be, I don't know how far out we're looking or thinking about modeling, but wow, good luck with that. And I say that because, we have seen a fall off in certain federal funding, especially for EVs. We don't know in 2 years exactly what's going to happen. There's just a lot of moving pieces on the funding. So can you talk a little bit about how you would grapple with that in the modeling process?
We're still working through that, but I think the likely outcome is that it's going to be a fairly low contribution to available funding sources. And I just want to note that the uncertainty in these projections is exactly why we wanted our consultant to build a reusable model that we can update as we need to, just as we do for utility rate models or utility supply projection models. This is a changing landscape, and we may need to do updates.
Yeah, because all of these 6 options, all of the modeling is extremely multivariate, and each of those variables could change within an option. And your last slide from the working group saved me from having to remind people that the timing of the air district regulations is up in the air at the moment. And so being able to adjust for each of these variables, I think, is going to be essential in getting models that we can use, not just initially, but sort of as we review our choices. So, all right, thank you. Any further questions before we go to public comment? All right, seeing none, Madam Clerk, do we have speakers? I'll come back to you.
We currently have 2 requests to speak. Our first speaker is Mira J. Mira, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah. I agree with everything that you're saying. That has to be. Hold on. Like.
Public comment, do you have a comment on our 6 options for electrification in Palo Alto? I think not.
The speaker has muted themselves, so we'll move on.
Yes.
Our next speaker is Stephen R.
Hi, this is Steve Rosenwald. I have no substantive comment to make, but the Zoom feed has traffic noise on it, and it makes it very hard to hear the audio. It's sometimes police sirens, sometimes heavy equipment. Right now, it's just like freeway traffic. So there's an open mic somewhere that would be nice if you could turn off. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Rosenblum. We will attempt to troubleshoot that as best we can. I see a lot of staff looking around, so appreciate the heads up on that. All right, so it sounds like we have no further requests to speak, so we will close public comment. All right, so let's bring it back to the dais for a discussion of these options, and I will start with you because I think I didn't quite get to you before we went to public comment.
It's okay. I didn't know if my question was too detailed as in our discussion of solutions. So I'm super sensitive to the affordability of electricity given the goals of the city, the goals of the utility commission. We've discussed sensitivity to all the utility rates rising, but in particular, electric prices rising seems problematic in our goals of trying to electrify everything. So I did have a question about, we're always limited to COSAs for our pricing, and I have a question about the legality or the ability to have kind of gas transition projects be budgeted, and can those go into a COSA? So for example, if we're getting people to switch out of a gas HVAC system into an electric HVAC system, could we fund a program, and since it's moving away from gas, it has something to do with gas, can that go into a COSA analysis?
I think it would be good to defer to our attorney.
So I mean, I think that's a complicated question that that I know that our office is looking at, but I mean, I don't have the answer to that sitting here.
Can I build on that quickly? I think, Jonathan, I wanted to just thank you for the presentation, but I am sensitive to the fact that in building out these models, there are just thousands of variables that are all interacting. And so anything you can do to simplify the takeaway for our commission makes this both easier to interpret and apply. So something along Commissioner Croft's line of inquiry might be, what's the ratio of an electricity price to a gas price? And how does that ratio end up influencing this sort of transition to electrification, right? That's a piece of actionable policy information that we may still use COSAs to set rates, but we can concretely understand the degree to which those varying prices relative to one another are likely to impact the trajectory on which we're headed. So I would just encourage you to continue to look for comparable, both like tornado plot, which variables matter, and elevate those for our visibility, but also to the extent that you create dimensionless numbers of that sort that can guide our thinking and our decision-making, that's an output that would be very helpful.
That's very helpful. And if there are additional model outputs that would help the commission evaluate utility bill impacts, I think that's definitely feedback we're looking to hear.
If I could add, Commissioner Motter, so Sacramento Municipal Utilities District has some metrics like that in terms of the electric rates and affordability, in terms of people potentially fuel switching to EVs. So they are tracking that as well. So that's one of the things we're talking internally on the group. And the previous climate action studies did take a look at a comparison to EV charging with lower rates in Palo Alto in comparison, and what that means to an internal combustion engine as well.
Right. I mean, certainly we don't have no control over gasoline prices, so that's outside of our control on a vehicle electrification front. But on a building electrification front, ultimately we do set both gas and and electric rates, and this 18% kind of surcharge also is a lever. It's an affordability lever, but it's also a price increase lever. And I think as a commission, we've wrestled with that as like, how do we maintain affordability while still not undercutting an electrification transition?
Is the temporal scope of the study to 2030, or when you say the modeling, or are you looking beyond that, or is it? And I guess the context of my question is, given we can't address very much on the electric vehicle side, we've heard gas, for the natural gas, the baseline forecast is that it's going to go down by about 1% to 2% between now and 2030. I'm beginning to wonder if any new projects or new policies that we would institute, you said the study is going to be available in the first half of next year, would really have much impact. And I don't see the levers, if we're talking 2030, that would really make a substantial difference. So, and I don't see, for example, that we have 85% of our customers, more or less, residential customers have at least one gas appliance. I don't see any impact from decommissioning gas for many, many years. So just a kind of a question, I mean, are we going to be looking at, now you can't tell, you haven't done the study, but are we just going to be looking at really small differences here?
No, and I think the next 5 years is not the most important time horizon for this study. We're looking out over decades in this study, and we'll need to, as we look at those longer term strategies. We'll have to look at what are the strategies over the next, what are the shorter, medium-term strategies over the next 5 years that complement that longer-term effort most effectively. And you're right that over the next 5 years, it's what it's been over the last several years, which is the sort of continued push to create a critical mass of adopters to the point that it becomes mainstreamed and you can regulate it and drive those adoption rates up even higher.
So just following up on that concern, we'd had some previous discussions at this committee meeting on the reality that, a couple of realities. Our programs and our progress are really leading. We're ahead of almost any other city anywhere. And yet, we are not going to hit our 80-30 goal. Neither is anybody else. But when these goals were first set, nobody had any idea because this has never been done. And so then the question is, what should we do going forward, both in terms of setting a time horizon on the goal, or a revised one, which I personally favor continuing to be very aggressive, but recognizing the reality that 2030 is not going to be our success date. And second, we, I guess 3 years ago, added a goal of 100% carbon neutrality, which has actually become a more broadly adopted goal among cities and other government agencies. In reality, it's easier to meet, interestingly, than the 80-30 goal, perhaps less meaningful, but nevertheless, if we, in parallel, look at how can we work even more toward the 100% carbon neutrality and push out modestly our 80-30 goal so that we are still on as aggressive a path as we can realistically pursue. Those would be kind of the directions that have been going on in my own mind, and I want to put that out on the table for feedback.
Commissioner Metz?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I thought the strategic alternatives that were laid out seemed to, cover the spectrum. So I thought that was a pretty good list. I have a question, though, sort of what's underneath those? In other words, what will be the content? Specifically, I think we can claim a pretty successful heat pump hot water heater program. I think we're installing a couple of hundred units per year, right? But if the air district regulations go into force, that will require all residential water heaters to be replaced as they have to be replaced with heat pumps, which would be, I'm assuming a tenth. They have a lifetime like 10-year-ish, so they'd have something like 10% of them would have to be replaced every year, which would be in the thousands. So does this program address how we would marshal our resources to be able to support the community in that kind of transition, with both just in terms of logistics, in terms of finance, all the things that we're doing in the existing program on a, at least one order of magnitude smaller scale? Are we prepared to scale that up? Is that intended to be included in here? All those sort of basic questions about how that would work when and if those regulations go into force.
So it is in here at a high level in terms of each strategic option we look at. We have to make some assumptions about what sort of support we're providing to people who are regulated by the air district regulations. So for example, in option 4, we would be looking at programs that are supporting people who aren't regulated, but not people who are. And that's sort of the level, that high level is what would be included in this analysis, but at a much more detailed level, we're We're both talking internally and talking with the Sustainability Committee. We just had a conversation on this in May about what kind of support we believe Palo Alto needs to provide as we enter into this regulatory environment. And we're also in conversation with the CCAs and other municipalities around the region to try and coordinate efforts. And I don't want to go too far down this road, but just the two things I'll say is that you have a range of supports that you can provide, from permitting to activating contractors to incentives or financing for people who are maybe exempt from the regulations and need some support. The other thing I'll say is that the regulations, there was just a discussion within the last month of providing exemptions for as many as 40% of people from these regulations, number one. And then number two, the way that these regulations will come into effect is complex. And you're likely not going to get 100% of the people who are regulated complying with these regulations as well. So we're trying to make some estimates on what we think the impact will be, and simultaneously figuring out how to support people.
Okay. So if I understood what you were saying, it was possibly support people who are not impacted by the Air District regulation.
Yeah, and we are getting a little bit of field, but the conversation in May also talked about whether there should be any support for people who are regulated, and there was some interest in understanding the costs of that, but I think more support for letting regulation. Folks who are regulated, don't necessarily need the financial support. Again, this is a very open and fluid topic, and it's not really the subject of tonight's discussion, but it's something that, we're going to factor in different options to different strategies.
Okay. Because, my thought was that suddenly literally thousands of people are going to have to deal with this each year within our community. And we have, I think, a pretty well-established program. At least my experience with the program was that it was very well organized and so on. So it would seem like somebody who suddenly has to deal with this, whether they want to or not, that would be a valuable support.
Yeah, and it would require a substantial amount of funding to do that. And again, these are discussions we're having, and it's something that is, I think, applicable in the next 3 to 5 years, and it's something we're going to work into the models. But I don't have numbers for you tonight. I think we're really.
Right. No, I wasn't even thinking of financial support, but more the logistical support. Here's how you go about getting a heat pump water heater.
Yes, and
all the contracting and all the stuff that.
Yeah, there's a cost to that as well, to that technical assistance.
Sure,
but that is one of the options on the table as well, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add in that. It is multivariate, multifactorial, because there will be some people who want to change before burnout, and so having support in place for those if they're low income or need other help is one thing. It's about 45% that under staff's current proposal at the Air District that would be carved out. Part of that's income-based. Part of that's if you have to upgrade your panel. Part of that is if you have to put in, more than 50 feet of electrical line. There's various different things that cause those carve-outs as currently proposed by staff. That vote won't take place till probably November. But each of those, the customer profiles that would end up with each of those carve-outs could be somewhat different. So the support that would be needed in some cases is financial, in some cases not. So just to reiterate that. Councilmember Liu.
Thank you. Appreciate all the comments so far. I think setting a realistic timeframe for an 80% reduction goal is really important, but one drum that I'll continue to beat as we do this modeling is I would also love to see what a per capita emissions reduction looks like. I don't know if modeling or considering any form of population growth over these timeframes is something that we can do and is already included. I think that sort of removes the potential disincentive when considering the goals to adding housing, when we know adding housing can actually reduce the per capita emissions meaningfully. Yeah,
that's actually been one of the real triumphs, I think, for Palo Alto so far is that we've actually reduced emissions on a per capita basis pretty significantly, down to, I think, California's target for, I can't remember which. A chat's going to pop up here at some point with our sustainability manager reminding me. But yes, we could include that metric.
Okay. I really appreciate it and agree entirely with the working group feedback. The working group did flag a point about neighborhood or block level gas line decommissioning, which I thought was interesting, but that's not a strategy or part of any of the alternatives that we're modeling right now, right? Is that a pilot that we do and then later we decide whether it's actually a viable thing to fold in?
So there's a fair amount of internal discussion about electrification of whole blocks and tracking of efforts on this across California. For the modeling, we're going to have to see, we don't really have good estimates, I think, of what sort of cost savings we might be able to leverage. So it may not be something that gets fully factored into this initial run.
Yeah. Yes, I realize that a block or neighborhood level gas line decommissioning is a whole nother level of geospatial analysis and a whole nother level of financial analysis that might sort of blow up the complexity of this analysis. So I think as much as I would love for that to be included in one of the 6 options or be a 7th option, I realize that might not be feasible, and I think I'm okay with that. Not to get too far into the specifics of how these alternative scenarios work, but I just want to think aloud a little bit about how we work with income, because there is an explicitly income qualified option, but I also suspect that in some of the other options, like maximizing end of life replacement and so on, that there would also be some sort of income or equity-based component. I think income is not necessarily the full picture, right? Like a lower income renter is going to have very different ability to electrify than a retiree who's technically low income, but maybe lives in a $5 million house and has a $5 million brokerage account or something. So it's not like necessarily the full picture of equity, and income is also not necessarily the full picture of workability, because some of the programs that we'd want to implement would be most effective if we just did something that was multifamily or for renters or for small businesses and small restaurants or something like that. So can you talk more about how we should think about income and whether we can include that kind of nuance besides just sort of straight income into the analysis of some of these alternatives?
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress over the last year or so in breaking down, and we showed some charts about this at the May meeting, where we're breaking down where folks live and their income levels and trying to get a sense of where do we have low-income homeowners versus condo owners, where do we have low-income renters, and where are these folks? Are these folks in dedicated affordable housing versus single-family homes versus market rate housing? And so we've made a lot of progress on breaking that down, because each of those groups are going to have different needs for program implementation. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that the building type is the primary driver for the cost of the actual measure. And so when you combine that estimate of where how many low-income residents that we have and what sorts of buildings they're in, that gives you the basis, I think, to be able to do some modeling of different sorts of program types.
Okay, great. I would hate for us to do low-income, but then only do low-income single-family homes, or I think having that data incorporated into this
Commissioner, can I just add a couple points? When you were talking about, the funding and affordability and income for residents, so
yes.
As Jonathan mentioned, we are coordinating and getting information from other CCAs, and they've done some surveys with their residents. And do you have funds to do this? type of improvement, and if, does that change with, 0% financing or other financing tools? So, that information we can glean off them, as well as also our other surveys here. And just circling back to your other question on electrification of a block, and as folks may recall, back in 2023, we did look at areas where we have gas main replacement programs, cul-de-sacs. Is that a possibility of maybe looking at those areas and electrifying in lieu of actually rebuilding the system that we're going to replace? So we have some geospatial analysis on that, and we put it in GIS. We're looking at that now. So those are one of the questions that came up yesterday, and we have active maps looking at that right now. So.
Right, I understand that's a big and interesting, but I guess I just wanted to confirm that was a parallel thread and not directly integrated into this.
Not integrated with this, but a separate path.
Yes. Maybe one last question, another sort of big question that I don't mean to derail things. Will this analysis in any way help us be able to work backwards if we were to set a target date like 2050 for decommissioning 90% of our natural gas supply or something like that? Or 2040, or some arbitrary date, some arbitrary percentage. The question is just, does the model and the framework that we're building also let us just sort of plug in numbers and then work backwards and see what the costs and friction would be? Or is that just such a different modeling exercise?
No, I don't know if I have the whole scope of your question, but I think the answer is yes, that we essentially have year-on-year information. So you can look at that and figure out where some of the friction points might be along the way.
Okay. All right. Great clarifications, I think. I appreciate the clarifications on the scope, and I think most all of my concerns are already baked in, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Liu. I love the per capita idea. I just wanted to say on the low-income definition, I appreciate your questions. Just FYI, what the Air District has done on low-income qualification is to look at housing cost burden because of what you mentioned. It's not just what's your income, but like how much you're paying in mortgage or not. And so there are a bunch of different ways that we could look at that factor. I'm going to move on. I think Commissioner Gupta, you've gone on and off a couple times with your light before Commissioner Tucker rang in, so I'll go to you in that order. But I think what staff is really looking for is if there are any revisions or discomfort with the 6 alternatives that have put out. So if you could wrap that into your answers, that'd be great. So Commissioner Gupta.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for the presentation. And let me just quickly echo Councilmember Burt's statement that, we might be not making 2030 for our goals, but I think we should be aggressive in trying to pursue them nonetheless. So thank you. Very excited for the planning that you've initiated here. Kind of my questions are based on these anecdotes I'm experiencing from reaching out to residents about our utility and about our electrification goals. There's a growing view in the city, particularly from those telling stories of from having electrified their own homes, that their bills have gone up actually. They've spent anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 upgrading the electric system in their house. They've upgraded appliances, and now the utility bill at the end of the day on electric has been more expensive than gas. And so that kind of informs a lot of my questions on this. I think we've talked a lot about the affordability question here, and I think as we present this to the city, I think we really need to have a story about how this will save, and I think you mentioned this in your own presentation, how this will save you, a resident of Palo Alto, money on your utility bill while being great for the environment. And I think we should really clearly show that. And again, I don't know if those anecdotes are true. I mean, there could be a lot of factors involved in what utility bills folks are experiencing. So in the utility conversation, I've raised this issue of having coherence between our grid mod and electrification investments and our gas system investments. So we're spending $400 million on grid mod to electrify, but we're also spending tens of millions of dollars, I think at least $50 million on maintaining our gas system. And I am wondering if, as we look at these different options, have we thought about modeling what the stranded asset situation might be in our gas system, whether we can credit any avoided gas CapEx in any of these 6 alternatives and present that as part of it? And then adding on to that, I think Councilmember Liu referenced this, and the working group may have referenced this as well, this concept of zonal decommissioning. What are those zones might look like best for our gas system. I actually do think we should try to include some of that analysis in this, because it might help us avoid, potentially tens of millions of dollars of stranded assets as we're looking at this on a decades-wide scale. So that's my first question, then I'll have more questions after that too.
Yeah, I want to turn to our utilities director, but I do want to say that we've made various, taken various looks at CapEx, and it is complicated. I do think there's, the gas transition study can provide a little bit more information for that. And it's likely, likely has some effect, but, based on the high-level studies we've done in the past, it's probably not a determinative effect. But I think every measure that you take helps move toward the goal, and so it is on our radar. But just for a broader answer, I wanted to turn to our utilities director on this topic.
Yeah, so the natural gas system is federally regulated. We are required to do a lot of inspections and replacements for our systems, not only for safety, but for, frankly, also affordability for our customers. So we also actively apply for federal grants. So as Commissioner Gustav, we receive grants from the federal government to replace our system that are still affordable for our customers. So have we looked into the wholesale changes and modifications of zonally reducing? No. Not yet. But part of this gas transition study, the preliminary results were more financial analysis. We do have a gas model, and we're starting to look at that to see what that transition will look like. And at the same time, we have an obligation to serve our customers in an affordable and safe fashion, and we will continue to do so. So those are the balancing parts that we have as having this utility. In terms of the question on electric rates, and is that switch moving from natural gas to electric? I will probably have to defer back over to Jonathan on that, on the efficiency of some of these appliances, and it also depends on how those folks use energy. But as you see folks moving toward EVs, that's the primary driver for your increased electric bill is that type of fuel switching as well. So we don't want to conflate those issues as well, but would love that feedback from those folks to help us really get in tune to what they're seeing.
Yeah, and I'll just note that, sorry, problem with the microphone. Yeah, and I'll just note that we're trying to get a better handle too on, it is always hard to track the impact of a single appliance on an overall gas bill, but it is possible. And so we're trying to get a better handle on some of that tracking, first in the commercial space, but also residential as well. So that should help over the longer term.
Oh, great, thank you.
Commissioner Gupta, I know you said you had questions, plural. We're going to try to stick with the council 5 minutes per round. I'll let you have one more if you'd like, but we do have 3 other commissioners that I think want to speak, so it's your call whether you want to do one more now.
Oh, sure, I'll do
but
one
we'll come
more.
Back too.
Yeah.
You can do one now.
Oh, sure, yeah, I'll do one more. Just to extend Council Member Liu's questions on kind of looking at the different income groups, and I think he exposed a good question on looking at renters. I reviewed the website, our city website, maybe about a couple months ago on how can renters kind of electrify, and they have unique circumstances, right? Because their residence is actually controlled by their landlord. So I'm wondering if we're considering that as an aspect in these 6 different scenarios, because I believe half of Palo Alto are renters, so that's probably a big chunk of our housing stock.
I'll get you a new one.
Thank you. This one? Okay, great. This is the specialized city clerk one. Thank you. It's got too many fancy buttons. So, sorry, I lost the question.
How do we, the rental question on the 6 options, how do we, is that part of it?
The rental question, I've got it, I've got it, thank you. So what's interesting about this as a question is that those landlords are also subject to the air district regulations. And so you need to factor in that regulatory effect. And then I think the question is whether we're planning to factor in portable induction cooktops, for example, or window mounted heat pumps. I think I need to check back on that, but I think I'll take that as a comment and make sure that whatever we're doing, we're making sure to take into account the impacts unless they're marginal.
Thank you, yeah. Hi. So I concede I'm not crystal clear on exactly what it is that staff would like or need from us and what questions you'd most like answered, but it's clear that you're looking at, I mean, from my point of view, a lot of the right things in considering how we're hitting SCAP goals, notably the connection to gas transition, which is hugely important. So you're thinking about that the right way as far as I can tell. You're thinking about the impact on electric rates, also super important. You're going to be modeling and producing, you're asking all kinds of questions like how much revenue is needed, what are the right revenue sources, and so forth. So I'm not sure what more I add to that. But since Pat or Councilmember Burt did point out the question of power sourcing, so carbon-free power sourcing, I'll bring up what I think is one of the most important topics we need to be thinking here, and that's grid-scale batteries here locally, not necessarily in San Bernardino County, that too, but local grid-scale batteries and storage. Also distributed resources, so solar and storage at large scale, so on all of our commercial roofs, the roof of Cubberley, the kind of operations that we, the utility, could be operating in front of meter, that needs to be part of it. And then, of course, I'll ask about grid mod. I noticed that one of the assumptions that needs, and I think it's chart 3 or 4, that needs revisiting is the cost of grid mod. Let me ask first, in your view, why does the cost of grid mod affect the questions or the modeling of these 6 scenarios?
This time.
Grid mod.
All right, so to the extent that grid capacity additions are needed, the grid capacity additions are needed, that's going to have to factor into the cost of community-wide electrification overall. And the utilities team has done a really good job of thinking through all the different dimensions of grid mod and which ones are, really specifically related to that extra capacity and which are related to aging infrastructure. So we, I think, have the numbers at our disposal to be able to update that assumption.
Anything else? Because Alan?
Yeah, just in terms of grid mod, I think that it's one of the larger capital projects, obviously, in the city, only second to the wastewater treatment plant. But when you look at these 6 different models in terms of the adoption, that may push some of the grid mod projects, and we have 19 projects defined now, maybe a little faster than others. So that would have to go into that modeling, as well as to the extent that there need to be more incentives or programs or funds necessary to have this adoption by the community. How do we generate that revenue, and then what the expenses are? So grid mod is tied to it just because it's the when and where approach, and then how fast we adopt. If the adoption comes at a slower scale, then there are probably some levers we can pull in terms of how quickly we need to do that grid modernization so that we're not building the infrastructure faster than the community is electrifying.
I realize that the topic of grid mod is adjacent to, it's not right in the heart of this whole discussion, but given the 440 million, it's a pretty big next door neighbor. And one of the points that gets made over and over, UAC, Finance Committee, and so forth, is we'd have to do a lot of this anyway. And UAC, at least, has never seen an analysis to estimate how much and what specifically would have to be done anyway. I do know from looking at the March presentation made to this group, which UAC did not have presented, you begin to break down the costs in a better, more specific way. But that $244 million that I believe is all around 12 kilovolt upgrades is so vast. It's more than all the other components of the 440 million combined. It is so big, and from as far as I can tell, poorly detailed, that it's just hard to answer that important question. What has to be done anyway? And the when and where is really promising. It's really good because you can do exactly that. You can phase up the grid mod spending, but I would urge analysis and answers to that question, so because it has such a big effect on rates. One last thing I'd like to say on the battery thing I mentioned earlier is that I know we've done analysis. I just don't think it's possible. It's very difficult, at least, to keep our analysis up to date with the plummeting cost of storage and deploying storage systems. And so I really challenge the current notion that grid scale batteries here locally don't pencil out. I'm eager to see new analysis on that because, again, it affects grid mod, the cost of grid mod, the rates, and everything we're talking about.
Do you have anything you want to say?
Well, just to circle back, so one of the requests that we will be fulfilling with the UAC is looking at distribution storage as part of that and what those costs look like. There was a presentation by Jonathan on looking at that and how it didn't meet the cost-benefit ratios, and we'll still bring those back to the UAC. And in terms of our abilities to take a look at the value and benefit from really looking at storage on a utility scale outside, it's also where the energy is being generated. So some of that value of the storage is the ability to discharge during when it has the most value and when Palo Alto is using that power. And having those batteries in areas where there is excess solar, so we can charge the batteries with very, very cheap power is one of those benefits. So when you look at bringing power and having batteries in Palo Alto, you really don't have that benefit of charging them with cheap power because we do not have local generation here of that scale, even if you take into account the potential to add solar at facilities. But it is something that we're bringing back and looking at, and it's not something that we're taking for granted or won't be reevaluating. There's also other cities evaluate this at the same time. We know that our Southern California utilities have looked at this and looking at distributed generation and storage in lieu of other types of centralized generation, and they also found it was not economical. But so I just wanted to give some of that background to it as well. But still something that we'll take a look at because things do change.
Hey, let's agree to disagree for now and discuss it soon, because like I said, it's hard to keep up with how fast this is changing in the favor of solar and
Okay, just to give you a little solace on the other question about the, we would need to do part of it anyway. I don't remember, Councilmember Byrd, exactly what the fraction was, but I remember before we embarked on the grid mod project and it came to either this committee or council a few times, and we did understand that we had aging infrastructure and we were going to have to replace a fair chunk of it. So the question was, what is the delta to do this additional modernization? So we did actually, we did look at it at the time before embarking. About 40%, Pat saying. So anyway, with that, Commissioner Bowder.
No, thank you.
Fair enough.
Okay. Jonathan, thank you again. I guess I want to just come back to this idea that we are not modeling to meet a regulatory target, so the precise number doesn't matter. Instead, the actionable policies that fall out and the ability for the general public to understand how those policies relate to decarbonization trajectories is very important. I would like you to think about how we might visualize this and publish this model as a communication tool, and whether it's feasible to do that. whether it's feasible to simplify things enough that, people, citizens of Palo Alto and business owners can play with it and understand why we're going to propose the changes that we're going to propose. I understand that the resourcing may not be adequate to do that. I think the resourcing is light, very light as it is, but I would really encourage us to think about that. Again, I think that that's going to push us towards kind of like metrics that are non-dimensional and generalizable. So like, for instance, on the affordability thing, like some very clear analysis of how total bill levels push up housing unaffordability or total housing unaffordability and for whom would be super pertinent to a lot of this discussion, right? So that we understand, okay, look, there's a cap. If we start applying taxes and to manipulate prices, or we start to do X, Y, and Z, like what's gonna happen, right, to that affordability stock? It's not specific to your scope, but it really is what ends up driving a lot of what happens in this model.
I'm happy to say it actually is part of the model and part of the scope.
Great.
It does output that information.
Amazing. I'll just say on the parcel tax thing, I personally think it's just like economically inefficient to tax something that isn't influencing behavior. And so like if I had to cut anything, it would be looking at taxes that aren't energy related as a way to subsidize these activities. That's my own personal opinion, and people are welcome to disagree. I do think that another question in here is how you end up allocating revenue to different programs. So like, how do you decide what to spend the money on first? And there's a big difference. I think this actually touches very directly on Commissioner Tucker's comment, which is that there are ancillary benefits to some of these investments. There are air quality benefits, there are resiliency benefits, et cetera, to the extent that, and those are judgment calls in the model. The order of operations, or the order with which you kind of like march up that curve of technology options. So I'd just like to ask how those ancillary benefits are being accounted for and the degree to which you are weighting things like resiliency and local air quality.
Yeah, so those co-benefits aren't directly factored into the model. The impacts on household expenses and energy costs and city revenue needs, those are all factored in directly. The co-benefits, we did take a look at those in the 2021 study as not a quantified, but and in terms of prioritization, essentially when we set up a scenario, we're going to be setting up what we're planning to spend money on, and then all of that money gets spent. We can determine what the cost effectiveness of different measures is, but more as a tool as we're engaged in implementation as opposed to when we're designing the model. So those decisions have to get made ahead of inputting the programs into the model.
I see. So you're not spending more on vehicle electrification because that's where you see the largest carbon savings. You're saying, I'm going to spend this much on vehicle electrification, I'm going to spend this much on building electrification, and that's therefore what my deterministic
yes, but when we make those decisions, we're taking the cost effectiveness into account. And that was in the SCAP funding study itself, is that marginal cost of abatement curve. So we're aiming for the lowest cost basket of measures that achieves the goal we're trying to achieve.
Okay. I guess I would just say, to the degree to which you can then find ways to communicate alongside this, both how that balance of allocation across, if not every little sector, at least this is how much it makes sense to invest in building electrification versus vehicle electrification, right? That's another kind of big picture policy decision that you could tweak in the model and either say it doesn't, it's insensitive to it, or it really matters, right? And I think it also helps communicate why, and here's the ancillary benefit of doing this to the degree that you can bring that in and show those co-benefits. I think it's going to help the citizens of Palo Alto get on board with what we're proposing. I think that's all. Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you. And I'll go to Commissioner Scharf, but I also know Commissioner Croft, you have your light on. If you want to turn it off, so it's because I think I'm draining all these batteries by y'all having to have your lights on. All right, thanks.
So I wanted to come back to the strategic alternatives that we're modeling, just so it's clear in my head. So on the baseline, it's basically we do nothing, but do you include the Air Board regulations and the state regulatory framework that exists?
Yes.
Right, so those would be without Palo Alto's special programs or something like that?
That's right.
And then when you move to the next one, the income qualified ones, have you decided how you're modeling the programs? I mean, I thought there was a sort of a disconnect, and maybe I got it wrong, between what Councilmember Liu was saying a little bit, what Commissioner Gupta was saying, and, are you modeling this that, primarily that if you own the property, here are the biggest things that would move it? Or are we looking and saying, if you're a residential tenant, I actually have no idea how you'd get residential tenants to get some sort of subsidy to get their landlord to make changes to their property, but maybe you have something. But also it's commercial tenants, right? That's all landlord tenant for the most part. So when you talk about income qualified, are you really looking at, someone owns and even a condo association, I don't even know how that works. I suppose you can change a cooktop out in your condo, but the heating and stuff, I don't know if it's more of a building or if it's more just hot water in your unit, which is probably hot water in your unit. But I think all of that's complicated. So I guess my question is, are you spending a lot of time on the income qualified one and then putting all those different variables in? Do you have that information?
So yes, in fact, we've been doing a lot of that work because of these income qualified exemptions related with that are being proposed for the air district rules. And so we've been doing a lot of work trying to understand, okay, who are these different income qualified folks in Palo Alto? Where do they live? How many of them own their homes? How many of those homes are single family? How many of those homes are condos? So we have at this point the information we need to break that down. And the pool is relatively small. Which makes this a relatively lightweight option in terms of strategic options. Because, as you said, you need to be a low-income owner, or you're dealing with dedicated affordable housing. But when it comes to tenants, the options are relatively low cost. It's those portable cooktops, it's the window-mounted heat pumps, and that's not going to be a lot. Yeah.
So then we move on to when you say local regulations, what local regulations are you looking at? Like, how do you model them? Is there a list of them? Or?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's possible, or maybe we can just look on our own screens at slide 6, which summarizes what goes into each of the strategic alternatives. So the two most promising regulations, and we looked at a bunch of regulations trying to estimate what their adoption rates are, but most likely are the Building Emissions Savings Ordinance and the Building Performance Standards are the ones that would drive adoption. So Building Emissions Savings Ordinance is focused on electrification related to home sales, either funding or actual projects.
So on that one, what you'd say it's a point of sale. You sell your house, you have to change it. Is that
yeah,
basically
or you have to fund replacements. You don't want to slow down transactions in that sort of a situation. And then building performance standards are gradually ratcheting down on large commercial buildings the emissions per square foot that you're trying to, or energy use per square foot that you're trying.
But only large commercial buildings.
It's generally buildings on the larger side, yeah. And so you're right that those small and medium commercial, may get left out. I think you have a lot of those would be impacted, I think, by the air district regulations. But it also, leaves a space for some of the hardest to electrify customers, like restaurants, for example.
Okay. And then the enhanced one, which is where we then basically give money for people to do this. Is that basically what we're looking at?
Which option are you looking at?
6. I'm wondering how you model 6. Like, do you take a fund and say, we're going to spend, I mean, obviously, if you went out there and said, we will pay for your home electrification tomorrow, you would move the needle dramatically.
Well, but who pays, right? Because all the money comes from the community at the end of the day. So number 6 is it's the same as number 5. So you have a comprehensive set of programs. Basically, everybody has access to the same sorts of, we're going to try and model cost-efficient programs that take advantage of all available funding sources like savings on the bill, that sort of thing. But then you add in early retirement incentives, that if you're retiring your gas water heater 5 years in, that you could get an additional incentive, for the lost life for that. And that would allow you to electrify on a shorter timeline. It's probably the most ambitious of all the different options that we're looking at, and definitely requires revenue. Okay. But I think it's a good, what it gives you is a metric on just how much effort is needed to achieve the emissions goals on a nearer timeline. And I think that's a good calibration for community expectations.
Okay, thank you.
And I might mention that when we talk about the air district rules on water heaters, if you have a large boiler, like a large one that serves multiple units in a multifamily residence or a large commercial one, that doesn't come into effect until 2031. So it's only the smaller ones first, then the heaters 2 years later, then 2 years later, the large boilers. Just FYI. Commissioner Kraft.
Thank you. In looking at the 6 options, and I appreciated the conversation about the cost effectiveness, it's kind of, my comment is along the lines of both cost effectiveness, how do you get the biggest bang for the buck, and also just recognizing the small size of the team. So going back to the comment from the working group about, my comment is really, do we want to put something on this list that acknowledges a smaller scope? So for example, you can take a peanut butter approach and kind of have a lot of things on your goal list, or you can really have a surgical strike approach where you find a big bogey, something you think you might be able to put the team's efforts towards and go after one thing, or maybe 2 things. So I think the 80% goal puts a lot of stress on us, a lot of emphasis on trying to hit that goal. But if we really want to have success with something, do we want to go deep on one thing or 2 things? So for example, you could say the transportation greenhouse gases are 57% on road. Let's just go deep on, slipstream with all the people buying EVs. Let's try to make all of our expenditures go toward how do we enable everybody to follow on and get the penetration insanely high. Or maybe that's not our goal. Maybe our goal is space heating, right? Space heating in commercial or space heating in both, whatever it is. But forget about all the others. So I wonder if there's any room for running that through these models, or whether that's a different model, to kind of acknowledge that I think chance of success is low when you're spread so thin.
Yeah, I think the way that you do something like that is build off the baseline scenario, just like you do with income qualified programs, but instead of a broad set of programs, you would focus on a single technology. You'd sort of, and I think the question is, what's your driving goal in that scenario? We can measure how long it takes to reach the 80% goal. And if you're focusing on a single technology, because to reach 80%, it's really it's an all of the above, it's all hands on deck to actually hit that goal. But if you give a long enough timeline in the baseline scenario, you'll get there eventually. So the question is, like, what is the metric for success for that scenario? And if it's, achieving a certain level of penetration, a certain level of adoption for that particular technology, we could not just, for a scenario like that, not just measure the year that the 80% goal is achieved, but just to sort of recognize the particular success metric for that scenario, you'd want to measure when did we hit that, whether it's 50%, 70%, or whatever adoption level you're looking for, what year did we hit that? Because that would be a milestone that would have a lot of public significance, even if we hadn't reached the 80% goal by that time.
Yeah, I guess kind of that is part of my point, is you want to be able to communicate very clearly what the goal is and then actually achieve the goal. So unfortunately, with the 80% goal, you never want to go say, oh yeah, well, we set too audacious a goal, we can't do it. And we did not achieve anything, right? Because we have so many goals. So the all hands on deck comment, it just kind of scares me because it sounds like we have so many goals and to hit, we're going to miss all of them, but we're going to move the needle. It feels better to me to pick a few and actually succeed with those few and then move on to something else. It's just thought about how to get a team behind something and create the snowball, basically.
All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Phillips and then back to Commissioner Gupta, and we'll see if we can get close to closure because we do have another item that the three of us have to deal with. But Commissioner Phillips.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to clarify. First of all, I think this seems like a reasonable spectrum. I haven't heard much else that people have talked about as levers that are missing. I just want to kind of build on what Councilmember Burt said and confirm that the outcome of this exercise is going to be over some time period, say 20 years. For each of these, what do we see as the investment required? What do we see as the gas rates, the electric rates? What do we see as the carbon emission reduction relative to the baseline? And then we will have that menu of options to be contemplated by UAC, City Council, Finance Committee as appropriate. Is that that certainly would be my desired outcome. Is that what's being envisioned?
You're talking about the metrics.
I'm talking about the outcome. So it's a model. You're going to run a model.
Yep.
How are you going to present the results of the model? What's the time scope that you're going to be presenting, and how are you going to present them?
You're not talking about the time scope for the outputs. You're talking about when are we coming back to you?
No, I'm talking about the time scope of the outputs. Are you going over 20 years, 50 years?
Yeah, so it's going to go over the time period that over which each strategy achieves the 80% goal. And that could be out in the 2050s or 2060s. And of course, if you're forecasting out that far, everything is extremely uncertain. But what I think it does is it gives you an understanding of, if you're just relying on, say, the 100 or 200 homes that are turning over every single year, how long does it take to actually reach these 80% emissions goals? So you really do have to go over, if we're sticking with that 80% goal, you really have to go over those longer timescales. But ideally, we're dealing with, for most options, with a time frame before 2050.
So the output is going to be, for each option, a length of time that it requires to hit the 80% reduction goal.
Yep.
The amount of reduction each year, the impact on rates relative to the baseline, the amount of external investment that's potentially needed coming from a parcel tax or some other location year by year. Is that what we'll see?
It's the adoption rate, it's the revenue need, the year. So the contributions to the adoption rate from the different parts of the different components to the portfolio, electric and gas rate impacts, and then impact on community member expenses. Those are the 5 main metrics.
And would you be doing these with baseline assumptions, single assumptions about future natural gas costs and electricity costs, or are you going to do some kind of sensitivity analysis across those, given, again, that you're talking about quite long timescales?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're likely to have to do some sensitivities. This was, as Commissioner Motter was mentioning earlier, but we're going to have to work from some basic assumptions about the long-term rates.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to stress what Commissioner Mauder said about thinking about how to communicate this. And again, the difference between the baseline, none of the forecasts they'll all be wrong. You know, things are hard to forecast, especially the future. But the deltas with the baseline at least will be reliable and hopefully insightful.
Right.
So to focus
exactly
on those.
I'm going to jump in before I go back to Commissioner Gupta. Yeah, thank you for asking the questions that clarified that we're going to model out however long it takes to get to 80% on the different ones of these. And in looking at the 6 options, because they kind of build one on another, it's not, I think, that you're going to be doing 6 totally separate models. You can incorporate some work from one into the other, like you mentioned, 4 is a combination of 2 and 3, et cetera, et cetera. But the reason I ask that is apropos of the discussion that my 2 colleagues have sort of had in part about if we're not going to hit our 80 by 30 goal, and apropos of Commissioner Croft's comments, if we're looking at hitting another or setting another goal so that we can articulate what it is that we can tell our community we're trying to do, it would be interesting for whichever one we seem to be centering in on if we could say, all right, we have our carbon neutrality goal. We're not going to hit the 80 by 30, but we would like to say, we're going to hit X by Y or the per capita or whatever it is. And somehow I'd like to know when we get to the leading models, that number. So in other words, I don't know how much more work that is, but if we're thinking that we want to have, some other numbers, when would we hit it under these things? So could that be figured out later in the process, or how would we think about that?
No, we have year-on-year numbers in the model, and so if what we wanted to look at was, let's say that we're achieving 60% by 2040 or something along those lines, so that we have, interim success metrics. California is doing that. We should be able to extract that from the model for different strategies.
Yeah, I think it would be good to restate somehow what we're doing so that we can say we hit it, and then let folks know, because to Pat's point, we are leading. Just because we didn't happen to hit this goal that we set with imperfect information at the time, it would be nice to say, hey, look at what we're doing. Not so we can say we're done and check it off, but so it inspires us to do more. And I think just kind of hanging around this goal, we're not quite there, doesn't help us do that to incentivize our residents, either to support more or to act themselves, because we're relying on them, right? We can sit here and make all the policies we want and create all the incentives, but we're reliant on our residents, our business community to actually do this stuff. So I think that messaging, hitting a goal, setting a goal, hitting a goal would be really helpful to us in getting to our ultimate goal, which is to reduce these emissions.
Yeah, I think trying to keep moving on a goal without milestones and celebration is tough.
Exactly.
And I think, I'm hearing the spirit of these comments, and I think there are some opportunities that we could.
Right. So if we can, sort of bake that into our evaluation and review of, what this output is, I think that would be helpful. Commissioner Gupta.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question, and actually kind of extending, I think, the mayor's point about, the residents and the businesses will have to actually do the things we're asking them to do. One of the more promising programs I've heard about, and I think you're probably already working on this, is on tariffed on bill financing or inclusive utility investment. Is that going to be modeled under strategies 5 and 6 that we have here?
So So yeah, where we're offering programs, I'm not saying that we're necessarily, because inclusive utility financing, there are a bunch of, there are a bunch of dimensions. It could be a promising path forward. There are a bunch of dimensions to it that are sort of practical and administrative that wouldn't be part of the model necessarily, but the core, from a financial flows perspective, one of the core aspects of a financing model like that is that you are getting some repayment over time that correlates with the bill savings from the people who are receiving an upfront incentive or an upfront payment. So it's analogous to financing, and I think we are going to model the financial flows that are equivalent to that and other potential financing measures, all of which are on the table.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm looking left, I'm looking right, I'm not seeing any more lights. Does anyone have anything else to say about this? Well, I will say that I have really enjoyed this and really appreciate the perspectives and expertise that our commissioners bring to our thinking on this. And I think it's been great to have us all together. I've never seen 10 people on this dais before, so that's quite exciting. And we've also got a huge array of staff here and out in the, I don't think I've seen 5 quite fit across there. So this is some kind of milestone. I hope someone took some pictures. But no, truly, thank you for your thoughtful input and for joining us on a Friday afternoon. I am very grateful, and I will close out this item. And we will take a 5-minute break and re-adjourn with a few of us. All right, thank you. That.
I think
Oh,
we,
my. All right, let's reconvene with now just the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee. Feels so empty in this room now. So we'll move to item 2, which relates to the EV Charging Hub Grant Program, and I will turn to Mr. Abendschein.
Great. Jonathan Abendschein, Assistant Director for Climate Action. Can I get the next slide, please? All right, so you have the staff report, and when we adopted the e-mobility strategic plan last fall, we took that to council. One of the strategies, we were trying to expand the strategies we had, one of which is putting EV charging hubs near multifamily buildings. We think public agency parking lots is a good place to start with those hubs. We also have, that's PAUSD, the city, and potentially, I think Caltrain potentially has some parking lots. We would reach out to other public agencies about interests, but PAUSD and the city have the most sites. So what we're proposing is a public agency EV charger grant program that could facilitate 100+ chargers at 5 to 10 sites. It could be used to leverage other grants, like a grant from the MTC that PAUSD has obtained, but there's more money for these types of things coming in the future. The guidelines in exchange for, so our grant would essentially be partial funding that could then be used to leverage either agency funding or grants. And in exchange for the grant funding, we would expect, we have a set of guidelines we're asking you to approve. We would expect the EV charging to be open to the public, that people can charge at cost overnight. And I just want to note that there's a line in the staff report that gives the impression that the guidelines require public access 24 hours a day. That's not in the guidelines. That was a mistake in the report. There are grants, other grants that do require public access 24 hours a day, but ours doesn't necessarily require that. And that they be within a quarter mile of multifamily buildings, ideally 1/8 of a mile, and ideally dedicated affordable housing. So we're asking for you to recommend approval of these guidelines to the City Council. We would go for approval in early August and do program design in parallel. This would allow for launch of the program on a timeline that's consistent with grant timelines, particularly for the PAUSD grant. Sorry, next slide. The working group feedback on this item was emphasizing the need to focus funding on public agency sites near multifamily, that, you know, the need for accessibility overnight and at cost, making sure that the community knows about the availability of the chargers, so outreach and signage, and then there was some discussion about how this fits into the broader goals for the multifamily sector, that this is only one piece of a broad strategy looking at curbside, EV charging hubs, shared chargers in multifamily buildings, which we've been doing, and then even individual spaces, putting chargers in individual spaces when you get enough adoption. Next slide, please. And this is the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Oh, my mic worked again. All right, colleagues, do you have any questions before I go to public comment? You both do.
In the last item, John, you mentioned something that was music to my ears, that we have, do you say a new grant on curbside charging?
It's, there may be funding involved, but it's technical assistance and partnership with technology companies that are trying to work in this space and coordinating efforts across several agencies so that those, to help get those technologies off the ground.
And within that context, is there any thinking to get going on piloting this as soon as possible so that we learn from it?
Yes, that's exactly the goal, is to try and get pilots out there as soon as possible.
Any estimate on timeframe?
I believe it's, we're aiming to structure the pilots by fall of this year, and then that would imply implementation in the early 2027.
And are these still anticipating tapping into the power in light poles?
No, I think light poles are less of an opportunity in Palo Alto. We don't have that additional capacity that you have in places like LA, where the light pole capacity was built with a lot of extra capacity, and they're making use of it. Figuring out where to get the power, and there are a lot of different strategies technology companies have been pursuing, but figuring out where to get the power is going to be one of the challenges.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Liu.
Thank you. I had a few clarifying questions. I'll try to save the more substantive questions for later. There's reference in MTC grant, and I think I'm a little bit confused to what extent we have obtained the grant or have, I think in the staff report, have approval to pursue the grant.
So the MTC grant has actually been obtained.
Wait, sorry.
We do actually have an MTC grant. It's for, the PAUSD effectively has a grant to pursue charging on school sites.
And that is PAUSD only, and that is 2.8 million, and that is different.
It could be used for city sites as well, but there also is a local match, and so funding's needed to be able to take advantage of the grant as well.
What kind of agreements or stipulations are there for what percent of that 2.8 million is for PAUSD versus other sites?
If PAUSD is able to take advantage of all of it, then it would all be for PAUSD. But if it isn't, then city sites could be viable for that, for the use of that grant.
Okay.
Or other grants for city sites.
Okay. So then in this public agency parking lots program, we're talking about both PAUSD and city sites, but if PAUSD has a separate $2.8 million grant and we're talking about a $500,000 program here, is it likely that any PAUSD sites will actually take advantage of this separate program in contrast to the MTC grant?
It is likely. 4 of the sites that they've been looking at for the MTC grant are near multifamily and good sites for EV charging hubs. And the structure of this grant encourages the maximization of charging on those sites. So, and also makes it more likely that they will move forward and take advantage of this grant, of the MTC grant, because there is the funding sources that they had for the local match for that grant, they have money for design, but for the construction local match, that money had to be expended. It was related to electrical upgrades that were associated with the EV charging hubs, and that had to be expended before the grant was actually finalized. And so the MTC grant has actually been in limbo for several months due to difficulties finding the local match.
I see. Okay, so this is getting, there are a bunch of moving parts. I'm trying to think this through. So yeah, PAUSD has a grant, might not make use of it unless they can also have a local match, which they would need our grant to be the local match for MTC.
That's how they would manage this, yes.
And so our, but then there's also this point that if they don't make use of the 2.8 million, it could be used for city purposes. And so it sounds like they have no plans to make use of the 2.8 million outside of the 4 sites that we would provide the local match for. So what does the balance of that money look like?
No, they may use, so the four sites that would be eligible for our grants, there are a lot of moving parts. What they would likely do is, there's a lot of variability in cost projections right now. And so the way they would likely take advantage of these two grants would be concentrating their chargers on the 4 sites. They have a fifth that is less applicable for the city's goals, but they'll likely concentrate these 80 chargers on these 5 sites. And if they're able to get those done within the grant funding amounts, they'll likely, and they have money left over, they have 3 other sites that they might expand to. If they either don't expand to those 3 sites, or they expand to those 3 sites and there's still money left over in the MTC grant, that provides an opportunity for the city to put some put some chargers on city sites as well. However, there's limited, we think we can get that done, but there is limited capacity within the city. And so our ability to leverage large fractions of that grant is probably limited. So we do want to see PAUSD make take advantage of as much of the MTC grant as they can, and then the city, may be able to do 1 or 2 other sites.
Oh, only 1 or 2 other sites on city property?
Right.
Okay.
That's really what we have capacity for at most.
It's still assuming that the PAUSD uses the 2.8 million. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe this is just a lot more to unpack during the main discussion, and this is going way beyond the clarifying question. But okay, maybe 1 actual or 2 actual clarifying questions. The first one is, what does overnight charging usage look like in our existing city garages? Is there already a ton of excess capacity, and if so, is trying to promote overnight charging maybe would that cast doubt on the goal of trying to provide overnight charging for multifamily homes?
I wouldn't say that the overnight, so we have some data, we don't have a full analysis yet of how much overnight charging is happening at the city garages. I will note that the city garages are a little bit farther walking distance from multifamily than these sites would be. But every charger that I've seen on a city garage site is getting some level of overnight charging activity at some point. That's not saying that someone's there every night, but at some point over the month, every charger is getting some sort of activity.
Okay.
So people are taking advantage of it overnight.
Yes. Over a month, I think being used at least once in one night is a low bar, though. And I think it's fine if the goal is mainly to provide daytime capacity, and overnight charging is just a bonus that we try to optimize for. But it's just not clear to me if we're really framing our goals around the program clearly, and if so, what that means for the guidelines we'd recommend. But moving on to the next clarifying question. So the staff report said that maybe 5 to 10 sites were already found. What are it sounded like that number might be 4 to 5. What are those 4 to 5 sites right now?
These are the 4 school district sites. It's 4 elementary school, or actually it's 4 schools near multifamily buildings. And they are within an eighth of a mile or a quarter of a mile of several hundred multifamily units. We also have looked at a list of 8 to 10 potential city sites, although we haven't narrowed down which of those would have the highest potential.
Right. And so the city sites, we could only optimistically choose 1 or 2, and then the school sites would be 4 to 5. I think an eighth to a quarter of a mile from hundreds of multifamily units is not necessarily a super high bar. I think just because the number of cottage courts and ADUs, and I'm not sure whatever else you might be considering multifamily, it'd be hard to find many places in the sort of core of the city that aren't close to at least hundreds of multifamily units. So if we have that list, I'd appreciate if we could pull that up and just talk about that in the next phase, because it sounds like that list is not just a short list, but is actually sort of the list of projects that would actually be built. So I think it'd be useful to know at this stage. But all right, that was already a lot for questions, and I'll hold the rest of the questions for the next step.
Just a couple follow-ups. When PAUSD pursued this grant, they were in a situation of structural surpluses and huge reserves. That is in the process of reversing itself to structural deficits and consumption of the reserves. I'll be surprised if they continue to embrace this opportunity to the degree that they initially were. So whether we have capacity or not, we should be talking with them about whether there is going to be greater opportunity for us. And then we have to figure out whether we have that matching fund capacity. And then as far as the utilization of the chargers on parking lots, I see the ones on Cal Ave frequently, and particularly the Cambridge lot. And even though it's surrounded by multifamily, utilization's pretty low there. I don't dispute that each charger occasionally gets used, but it's low, disappointingly low, and maybe we need to promote it more, because we may have a lot of folks who don't know it's there, including property owners and property managers who can make sure that's the case. But I'm disappointed that it's so low, but it appears to be so. But then you mentioned Caltrain sites, and I think those are opportunities. And then the last thing is we should be looking strategically at where housing will be multifamily housing in addition to where it is today. And we all know that we've got certain areas that are going to have, in all likelihood, some major growth in multifamily housing. So how do we really plan to accommodate that? However, this is a qualifier for the new multifamily housing, is that in speaking with one of the major developers in our community and region, who has a sustainability team within their multifamily development, they said, you don't need to push this anymore. We, as multifamily developers, are putting in charging on our own initiative because it's a competitive necessity today. Our tenants are demanding it, which was great to hear. And so that's just another factor that we want to put in. And so it kind of counters that argument I was just making about the location, because it may re-emphasize that our biggest challenge is existing multifamily, not new multifamily. Thanks.
I just want to share that the list is Addison, Hoover, Briones, and Ohlone, and they're near a total of 1,000 multifamily units between the four of them. So it's a lot denser. There have been EV chargers built at other school sites. Most of the school sites actually are pretty far from multifamily, but these four are high potential. So it's 750 units, of which 250 are dedicated affordable.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. About whether or not people are using the overnight garage, whether it's an issue of marketing or what. And I guess what I'm wondering is there may be people that not only don't know it's there, but don't believe it's okay, like to leave a car overnight. So I think it's kind of both things that, because I wouldn't necessarily know it was okay to leave my car there overnight. So what are we doing now, if anything, to really let people know? And what could we do in your judgment?
Yeah, this is something we talked about at the working group, is the need for that outreach and signage. So direct outreach to people who are within the walking distance is a really critical item. And then, signage that really grabs people from the street when they're going by, so that they understand that there is availability of EV charging. And some of it is just going to be a matter of growth, that this will take a little bit of time. There's a chicken and egg problem that you need to have the charging access, but then people do take some time to get those cars as well.
Right, no, but you're right about the chicken and egg. If they think that charging is relatively easy, they're more likely to get the car.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I think Pat makes a good point about the developers saying you don't have to push us anymore. What'll be interesting to see is, as the demand curve rises, does the installation curve keep up, be ahead of it, be behind it? How much do we need to supplement that? And I think, time will tell. They'll do whatever's most profitable, but, they'll build it at one thing, and then the building will last, X years, and that curve might change. So
Yeah,
a lot of moving pieces.
it is, and it's the new construction is the easy part. It's the retrofits that are really challenging. And so being able to provide some charging near those multifamily buildings means you don't necessarily have to do a whole retrofit project for that, for those first few people to buy those EV chargers.
Right. Yeah, so why don't we see if we have public comment on this item?
There are no requests to speak for item 2.
Okay. Well, I'll just say I love this idea. I just think it's wonderfully brilliant use of public lands, and if we can figure out the time of day in and around schools for the grant, and I think it's pretty wonderful. I'm going to stop there because Councilmember Liu self-censored, thank you, to hold off on some of the things for this round, so have at it.
I'm afraid that I still don't quite understand the moving parts, and that the net result is that we're not really going to prioritize the projects that at least accomplish the stated goal of supporting multifamily homes. If the stated goal were different, maybe I could wrap my head around this more easily. But Ohlone, for instance, top of mind, isn't next to any multifamily housing, or at least none sort of directly touching it. Juana Briones is in a pretty single-family area, except for maybe one apartment building that, from Googling, seems the taller one off Rastradero, that from Googling seems to have their own EV charging. And so at least that super immediate capture doesn't seem obvious to me. So it's not clear that we're hitting the goals that we should, that we might be able to hit if we were to prioritize something like the Ventura Community Center or the Winter Lodge, which is actually close to a good chunk. Both of those locations are close to a good chunk of 60s, 70s, 80s, relatively dense multifamily housing, the kind of housing that we've talked about the challenges of getting renters to persuade their landlords to actually install EV charging. So I really don't see how we're advancing the goals that we think we are advancing. And I don't really think it's an issue of the guidelines exactly, or an issue of, well, it's just more of a structural issue about the grant conditions and the point that these, at least 2 or 3 of these 4 sites that are identified don't really seem like they're good at achieving the goals that we want them to. So how should we think about that? Is this just what we're stuck with?
Well, I don't know what, I don't know what you're seeing or not seeing in the casual Google searches. We did a GIS review of each of these sites, and Addison and Hoover were each near 200 to 300 multifamily units within a quarter mile, of which 190 of them were dedicated affordable. And then Briones and Ohlone had fewer, but each were within a quarter mile walking distance of 130 units each, of which Ohlone was 60, had 60 dedicated affordable units nearby.
I think the extra layer that I'm seeing, and also, of course, there's a lot of stuff that I'm not seeing with the Google Maps lookabout, is that seemingly a decent chunk of these will have EV charging already. And also, I'm looking more in the immediate block plus couple blocks range. So I'm not capturing maybe some of the buildings that are more on the periphery. So I think that's the gap. Clearly, those are non-trivial numbers that you are sharing, but I do suspect the numbers could be multiple times higher if we prioritized Ventura Community Center or other places where I think there's a much more clear need that aren't, where the land use, sure, there might be some apartment buildings captured, but the land use is still 90%, a vast percentage single-family homes. So it's not really going to get the uptake we think, especially if we're going to put on the scale of 80 plus chargers across those 4 sites.
Yeah, so Ventura is on our city list. And the grant program is not just for these 4 school sites. There's enough proposed budget in the grant to be able to do sites like Ventura in addition to these school sites.
But I heard that we could maybe do one, but that was uncertain.
We would need, if the MTC, so when I say that, and this is where all the moving parts come in, but when I say that we have the capacity to do maybe 1 or 2, I'm talking about our capacity to be able to do projects on the timeline to be able to take advantage of the MTC grant if there's available funding from that. That's not the only grant funding source that we might be able to take advantage of. It's just that when we talk about the MTC grant timelines, we might only be able to have 1 or 2 sites ready on the timeline that the MTC grant requires. This proposed grant program, this public agency EV charger grant program, does not have those short timelines. And so the city could take advantage of this for Ventura Community Center or other sites over a longer timeline when other grant funding becomes available.
Okay.
So I don't think it's an either or. I think there's potentially an and here.
Okay. A couple more points of confusion. Council did get an email from the city manager, part of our regular updates, and the joint MTC PAUSD grant was shared with us maybe a few weeks ago as this new thing. I'm guessing it's not actually this new thing, and from what I'm hearing, it's implied that we're running out of time to actually utilize this money.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so is it a done deal if we move forward with the guidelines today that the 4 sites will be those 4 school sites, and then maybe there will be a 5th site for Ventura or whatever else the city prioritizes, at least for this first phase of funding and this first phase of for this first timeline that we have MTC with?
Those would almost certainly be the first 4 to 5 projects that participate.
And there would be no ranking system or ability for us to say, actually, we think maybe Winter Lodge or the surface parking lot we have in Midtown is actually a better fit in terms of supporting our multifamily residents.
I mean, I think it's definitely possible, and we do these sorts of analyses to look across a wide range of sites and say, here are the sites that we really, that would be the top possible sites for us to implement on. But one of the challenges that we always run into with these programs is who's ready? Who's ready to move? Right. Who's ready to, who has the electrical capacity and who's willing to participate? And so we could try to optimize and try to, it would take us a longer time period, and then frankly, I think we would lose access to that 2.8 million.
Right.
Can I just add to that, is that in the discussions that we've been having with the school district about this potential program and their expressed interests, to your point, Councilmember Burt, expressed interest, at least right now, on still trying to pursue this on what's a fairly tight timeline. I think if we introduced a lot of uncertainty into the prospects of them receiving the grant funds as part of our development of this, they would probably be unlikely to continue moving on the pace to be able to access the MTC funds.
I mean, I'm happy to do the school district a favor and give them this money so we can seed this match and we can provide EV parking for their employees, and we can provide EV charging for the predominantly single-family homes that actually live within a reasonable walking distance of at least most of the sites that they nominated. But I think that's just what I would be approving. I'd be approving doing them a favor and giving them some money, not actually advancing the goals that we stated and that we thought we were going to advance today.
I think we just have a different perspective on it. Yeah. We were struggling with, we were struggling with this at one point before we had community goals to push for multifamily EV charging hubs. And before we'd done the assessment to see which of these sites might actually serve as multifamily charging hubs, we're satisfied that these 4 school sites are near quite a lot of multifamily units, and we would be proposing this program if we didn't think it advanced city goals. We're not, in fact, it wouldn't be, we just don't have a policy mandate or a desire to spend city or special revenue funds on something that's not going to serve multifamily residents. We don't have a priority goal to try and provide employee charging for the school district. So that's not the reason for proposing this program at the end of the day.
I can't look at a map and reasonably see how Loney or Juana Briones would have any substantial nighttime usage from multifamily residents, maybe from single-family residents, but.
Maybe you can follow up offline.
I was going to say, I think we have a difference of opinion here, sure. And yeah, so you can do what you can do, but I think we've heard from staff sure. what they're going to say. I don't think we're reaching resolution. Do you have anything else? Because no. Okay, so I do think that George raises a good point, but I want to wrap in what Pat raised, which is, I don't know when you last had your conversation with the school district, but if they are feeling differently financially now, and if they weren't interested in pursuing all 4 sites, I take it we would push them to the 2 we do feel have greater impact, which are Addison and Hoover.
Yes, I think Addison and Hoover are the best 2 sites.
Yeah, so if they want to pursue all 4, they want to pursue all 4. But if for some reason they don't, and we push them to those more highly impactful sites, at that point, could we then be looking at the other city beyond just one additional one?
Absolutely. So the, Yes, and also we do have, the limitations on the staff capacity on that short timeline as well.
Sure.
But yes.
Yeah. But if, to the point of not letting it go unused in a different context, if we could try, that would be helpful. Yeah, because who knows, and then that might indirectly solve your concern. But, okay, because it seems to me like we need to know sooner than later that they're still full speed forward or not on those 4 sites, and maybe you've talked to them quite recently, but.
Yeah, they do. No, they are.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't have I don't have the buffer map for the walking map for Ohlone in front of me, but as I look at Briones, the multifamily that we're talking about is in the 1/4 mile, 1/8 to 1/4 mile radius, and so it's a little further away. You have to scroll away on the Google map a little further.
Okay. I have some other comment, and it's gone, so I'll turn to Pat. Yeah, please.
So whether it's from this tranche of grant funding or otherwise, another site that I don't know if you've looked at is Alma Plaza, which we have public parking spots underneath the grocery store that are underutilized. And that construction is relatively new, so I imagine they have good amount of power, but it was before we implemented EV charging requirements. And then I do like the Ventura site a lot because that is just surrounded by multifamily, and it's one of our lots. And I think you're right too that the Winter Lodge also is one of these areas where we have large amounts of market rate affordable housing. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
I agree with all that. Do you have more you want to say?
I think I would either need to think about this totally differently along the lines we've already discussed, or I think I could maybe approve this if we could have some clarity in the guidelines that really prioritized at least one of Ventura Community Center so that and or Winter Lodge and or one of these similarly identified city sites that are I think objectively serve the stated goals much better. I think if the Ventura is like a 5th in a maybe, then it's hard for me to accept this. If it's like the #1 priority and then maybe 1 or 2 of the school sites gets dropped off, then that's fine. How can we, is there some reasonable way in the guidelines to say we prioritize sites or we score sites based on these criteria? And so therefore, we'll squeeze in a couple of these city sites, at least the ones that we can get ready for the grant funding.
So yeah, I think, there's nothing in the guidelines that specifies how the MTC grant is to be used. And the program as we're proposing it has enough budget for the school sites. The limitation, for the city sites, in addition to the school sites. You don't have to cut the school sites to get the city sites. So there are sort of 2 ways to think about this. The first is whether those 2 school sites just need to be disqualified entirely, which, and if you were looking at an 1/8 mile walking distance instead of a 1/4 mile walking distance, you're potentially disqualifying those sites. I do think there's a substantial portion of the MTC grant that probably gets unused just because of the limitations of the grant if we go down that road. But, that is an amendment that is certainly possible to propose. Whether the MTC grant gets used for other school sites or for the Ventura site is not in this proposal tonight, but it could be a subject of discussions with PAUSD and with our internal staff in terms of what we think is possible to achieve on our timeline.
Right. So I think I had actually gotten confused. So there's,
so we
right,
could
there's not a
take that.
shortage of money, there's a shortage of time.
Right.
And so it's not like we need to prioritize Ventura Community Center over a school site. It's just that we need to rush to get Ventura Community Center, some engineering drawing done or something like that to be eligible. How much time do we have until we actually?
About 6 months.
Okay.
So it's not impossible, but we're internally talking about how to meet that timeline.
What do you need, if anything, to be able to meet that timeline decisively for Ventura Community Center and Winter Lodge and or a few other sites? Maybe Winter Lodge is more complicated, managed by another entity, but for the sites that we do have, 6 months is tough to get multiple of them, but it seems feasible to at least get a couple more.
I think first off, having site control is pretty critical. So the Ventura site is, I think more viable. And it would involve two things. First, we'd have to make the timeline work internally, and that's really just an internal discussion. We would need to get this grant program off the ground on the timeline that I was laying out in the staff report. And we would need to have a conversation with the school district about the use of the MTC grant and just be clear that in addition to the 4 core school sites, Ventura is getting done, or 1 or 2 of the city sites are getting done. And then we see how we can make good use of the rest of the MTC grant.
Yes, I mean, I think that sounds like a good game plan, and that sounds like a minimum baseline because they're not going to be able to use 2.8 million with 4 school sites. I would also say that we should really prioritize the city-owned parking lot in the Midtown Shopping Center area behind the CVS that is similarly positioned to the Winters Lodge and actually surrounded by a lot of multifamily housing that might not otherwise add EV charging.
Yeah, that one actually has there are applications for several EV chargers from private companies going in at that site. So it may be duplicative, but we have looked at that site as a possibility.
Okay. I had a point, but I lost it. Might need a second. Overall, I'm not thrilled at all with where we are. I think I understand your position. I think it's also very clear if you look at a map of Juan Briones or Loney, that it's all single family, at least in the immediate block or 2 radius. I'm also fine doing the school district a favor. So even if I did switch that framing, I could accept it. But in advancing this, I'm really putting a lot of faith in Brad Public Works to get some more city sites that are actually going to serve multifamily residents toward the top of the queue. And I did remember the last question. One of the guidelines said that how strictly are we holding ourselves to these guidelines? One of the guidelines said that EV charging should not be within, these hubs should not be in a quarter mile of other EV charging, city-owned EV charging infrastructure. And that doesn't quite make sense to me in the case of, downtown, you might want a few different EV charging hubs in the future. If we approve these guidelines with the language as is there anything actually precluding multiple EV charging hubs within a quarter mile of each other? Or is that more of a soft sort of suggestion for eligibility that will then be sort of scored and evaluated separately?
I think, given that we have a lot of availability at existing charging hubs, like we talked about earlier, that having that providing funding for even more charging hubs within a quarter mile of existing hubs is probably a little bit duplicative. I think that was our thinking there.
But is it a strict guideline or not? Because I still think a quarter mile is basically from the top of University to pretty far down University. If we maybe have no significant uptake on one part of University, in some charger there, that's not to say that a charger at hypothetically, some other lot, like the Webster Street Garage, couldn't be useful.
Yeah.
Obviously making up the scenario here, but yeah, how strictly would we hold ourselves to that quarter mile?
I think we were looking at it as a pretty strict guideline, but if we want to be more flexible on that as part of this discussion, I don't have a good picture on how many additional sites in the city that might open up. We did take a look at it with the quarter mile radius exclusion, but without the quarter mile radius exclusion, it might open up some additional sites that become effectively workplace charging. So just a little unsure about what effect that would have.
If the utilization increases, we could adjust the design guidelines.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
we have flexibility.
also not to say that we can only pursue future city mobility hubs under the guise of this program as well. I mean, these are balancing. If we create a program like this, then we're obligated to fund projects that meet the criteria.
Sure, okay. I'll trust that we will look at the utilization data, and if there's actually some signs of demand that we can find, that we can find more sites within a quarter mile of each other.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to move the staff recommendation and offer Councilmember Liu an opportunity to do a signing statement with his caveats. I'm kidding. But no, I do move the staff recommendation. If there's. Second. Thank you. Anything more? I think not. Okay, Madam Clerk, let's vote.
Chair Vinker?
Yes.
Councilmember Liu?
Yes.
Councilmember Burt?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, excellent. Well, this was quite a good meeting, I feel. A lot of good substantive conversation. So thank you, staff, for hanging in there with us for 3 hours and for organizing us all the logistics of this meeting. With that, I will say, have a good, next meeting? Sorry.
We almost forgot, yes. Next meeting is August 7th, that's the Friday when council is back from its break first.
Actually, it's not, because we adjusted the August schedule. Instead of starting on the 3rd, start on the 10th.
Okay,
Because
yes,
there's a
I
very.
had heard the first council meeting would be on the 10th. I mean, we're
Yes.
certainly open to look at adjusting this meeting. This meeting for the 7th was still at this time on the books.
And we can go ahead with that, but I just thought I would note that it's now would precede the first council meeting, so I thought I would check see if anybody has any disinterest in the 7th. Seeing none here, you good? All right, then we can go ahead with that. I just wanted to lift that up.
Okay. So we are planning 3 topics. So the Youth Climate Advisory Board for the 2025-26 school year is planning to come to the meeting and give a report out on their activities and accomplishments. And as well, we're planning to have the first review of the 2025 greenhouse gas inventory, and also bring to the committee the Regional Water Quality Control Plant biosolids facility plan, hopefully in a state to be ready for the committee to make a recommendation to the council.
Great. Well, I'll particularly look forward to the YCAB folks coming and meeting with us. That's terrific that we're doing that this year. All right. Well, with that, I wish you all a good weekend, and we stand adjourned.